Well, good morning, friends. Man, it is great to be back here at the Goose, to be with the lovers, the healers, the activists, the caregivers, the damn givers, and just, if that's you, just make some noise today. Now, I remember my first introduction to Wild Goose Festival. So it was about 14 years ago, and I was a pastor at a church in Charlotte, and I was in my office, and I was at the point in my relationship with that particular congregation, which you may have been with a congregation or maybe with a human being, where you are realizing this is probably not going to work, right? I had these inklings that things were not going well. I was being ghosted by my own church, which was really odd, but you know when you've done everything you can, but it doesn't seem like it's a great fit. And I was a decade or so into ministry at the time, and I'd been feeling an increasing tension between the person I felt called to be, the more I leaned into the life and ministry of Jesus, and then the pastor I was expected to be, right? So there was a tension in wanting to speak more explicitly into matters of sexuality, gender, race, and realizing that that was probably going to be a liability. And that I may have to choose between being an employed pastor or an honest pastor. So I had this definite tug of war between organized religion and my disorganized spirituality. And so I was sitting in my office and this mailer came in, this actual paper mailer for something called Wild Goose Festival. And I thought, well, that sounds bizarre. Let me investigate this, and I start thumbing through it, and I see faces and names of people I recognize, Ken Medema, Tony Campolo, Brian McLaren, people who had already from a distance begun to invite me down the path of eventual ministry termination. Right, they'd already planted these subversive seeds that were taking root in me. But the more I read about this festival, I started to get excited about it. And I made a terrible mistake. I mentioned it to one of the pastors on our staff. And he immediately looked as though he had some sort of indigestion. And he said, oh, you don't want to go there. You know, instead of basically, that's a gathering of weirdos, liberals, heretics, backsliders, and Democrats. And so I said, exactly. And so I read the room, and I considered my health insurance package, and I said I shouldn't pursue this now, but I was going to continue on my spiritual journey. And if I was going to do the work that I was still wanting to do, I was probably going to have to make home with the weirdos, right? So it's like a year or two later, and I found myself in Hot Springs attending Wild Goose there. And there I began to explore the idea of publishing my first book. Even my friend Steve Knight back there and I were having these conversations. And that book turned out to be A Bigger Table. And it was a book about how we could create redemptive community, spiritual community, where everyone could be seen and heard and loved and respected. Now, friends, I wish you could have seen me back then. Maybe you don't remember, but I was effervescent. I was bubbly. I think I looked like a young Brad Pitt. I don't know what the heck happened, okay? But I wrote that book in 2016. It came out in early 2017. And guess what happened? I found out I didn't want the biggest table as I thought. Because what started to happen from 2017 on was I began to feel a resistance to welcome people to my table. And I began to face my own fraudulence, my own hypocrisy, my own inconsistency. Fortunately, that's all been resolved.
Yeah, right.
So we're good. But friends, now here, a decade later, after 10 years of national fractures and relational fractures, social upheaval, 10 years of constitutional crises, 10 years of staggering inhumanity, 10 years of watching celebrity evangelists, preachers, and pew sitters selling their souls, their platforms, and their pulpits, 10 years of being stunned by people I know and love who have embraced all of this movement that is antithetical to the life and teachings of Jesus. And so before we begin with all of that, I want you to know that this is a panel discussion with all of us today. If at any time I'm speaking and you feel compelled to share something, raise your hand, I'll call on you, and I'll share what you share. Unless it disagrees with me, then we will silently push you aside. Thank you. Starting with this guy over here. Okay. So all of that to say, I've been left with a question that I wasn't sure I wanted to ask you, but I'm going to ask you because I value the shared wisdom of this community. And the question is, has progressive Christianity failed? Not because we're on the verge of theocracy, though we are. Not because Project 2025 is quickly being implemented, which it is. Not because we haven't acquired political influence, because we don't want that necessarily by our nature. But has progressive Christianity failed because we've failed to give conservative Christians and liberal believers a compelling alternative? All right, so we're done here. Enjoy your day. Does the fact that over the last decade we haven't been able to move more white evangelicals from MAGA an indictment of them or of us? Can we chalk it all up to toxic cocktail of misogyny, racism, homophobia, lousy theology? Or have we dropped the ball in our messaging and our methods? What have we offered to people to the right of us? Because I realized my bigger table wanted to be center to the left. That was as big as my bigger table. So I don't have a lot of answers. I'm having a lot of questions and you're going to answer. So if you're looking for answers, maybe go down and see if someone more wise, Paula, is down there or someone else. Why have we been unable to attract the nuns who increasingly find religion unnecessary, who respect the compassionate social justice of Jesus that we're selling but have no desire to align with him officially? Why haven't we been able to change the minds of the duns who either by necessity or choice no longer feel organized religion has a place for them? And have deconstructing Christians deconstructed right past us on the way out? Most importantly, what does the Christian left need to do to make a meaningful impact on our nation? And what lessons can we learn from the religious right? So think about that for a second, but I have another question. The question is, how did you end up here? Think about how you ended up in this farm, at this place in time in the history of the planet. What led you throughout your meandering journey to be showing up in front of this middle-aged fraud, right? Because I ask that question all the time, how did I end up here? This was not my plan. I was drafted into ministry. I did not choose it, right? But all during my 25 years of ministry, I asked this question, how did I end up here? Because I didn't feel like I was supposed to be there. I can remember being at one of my first youth lock-ins. Right. The lock-in is something that a layperson does not get to be privy to until they're in ministry, and that is where you intentionally secure yourself into a building with other young people. And I remember looking at some 4th or 5th grade boys dancing on top of the Jones Memorial piano and thinking, how did I end up here, right? Or I was in rural Pennsylvania, and we were taking the students to a corn maze. And we got about halfway through the corn maze, and we saw this clearing. And there was a bunch of chairs lined up. There was a TV with a VCR, and he asked us to sit down. And they showed us a badly produced movie about students who went drinking and driving and died before they accepted Jesus and all went to hell. And he said, if you want to get out of the maze of this life, you have to accept Christ. And I realized I had stumbled upon an evangelistic corn maze. And I thought, how did I end up here? But I can also remember being in front of a group of people in my church getting ready to give the eulogy for one of the first students that I ever had, thinking, how did I end up here? Or getting called to the police station by one of our worship team members because she'd made a terrible mistake, and the person she trusted the most was me, and I walked into the police station thinking, how did I end up here? So we're all asking that. And I think we're asking that of the church. How did we end up here? We see the attrition, right? We see the aging of our congregations, the growing difficulty of reaching and activating people, and we're facing the uncertainty of life after the pandemic. We're looking across our nation and seeing a rising expression of religion while claiming to be of Jesus often seems antithetical to him. We too often see a church that reminds us that equity is still elusive, that all people are not yet fully seen, that justice is still delayed. The presence of Jesus should yield an exhale, a feeling of foundness and rest. And we see so much evidence of a church that feels predatory, and we say, how did we end up here? And we ask this of our nation, don't we? How did we end up here? How did we end up 2025 still arguing the value of a black life, still debating whether someone should be able to make their own healthcare decisions, still wondering if people should be able to marry the person they love? How did we end up here with such bitterness and hatred defining us in the nation and characterizing so much of the church? I think we ended up here because caring for the least of these is not always compatible with the American dream. The American dream that we have inherited stresses personal liberties as opposed to the collective liberation that Jesus wants. America is built on capitalism and consumerism, and Jesus says generosity and sharing is the only way we're going to make it through this thing. The American dream talks about competition, but the kingdom of God is a movement of collaboration where everyone has something to offer to the greater good. And America is about individualism, but Jesus says we need interdependent community where someone else's gain is our gain. That's the problem, I think, friends, that compassion is countercultural here. You know, we've been asking this question, how did so many people, Christians, join this movement that seems predatory toward everyone, even themselves? But I think that's the wrong question. I think there's no surprise that evangelical Christianity and the MAGA movement have joined together, because I think it's a much shorter leap from Bible Belt evangelicalism to MAGA than it is to the teachings of Jesus. Now, I have to be honest with you. Let me see what time it is, make sure I respect. I didn't want to give this talk. Here's why. I know how tired you are. I know the frustration you're feeling. I know the grief that you carry. I know the knot in the pit of your stomach that returns every day when you see the state of the world and you see the state of your soul. And so here's what I want you to know. I'm not beating you up today. These questions are not designed to demoralize you. They're designed to be a mirror so that you can look and see, what are we collectively doing and what am I doing? And maybe I need to course correct, or maybe I need to think things differently. Because I come here and I love this community, and yet I have this sort of deja vu. Some of it's beautiful, but I'll give you an example. I was on a bus trip with a bunch of speakers, many who are at this festival or frequent it. This was about 7 years ago, and we were going through the middle of Red, Texas, and we broke down, which was a horror that I cannot get into right now. But one of the speakers who was older than me, he said, telling us his story, and he was talking about being on a bus just like we were. And he said, it was about 20 years ago, and I had written a book about how we can redeem Christianity for Jesus. And I thought, oh no, we're still here. Like we haven't made any progress. And it feels like we're worse off than we were. Do you ever feel like this is futile? Yes. It isn't. But that's the lie that we believe, because we're looking at the anecdotal evidence in front of us. We're only seeing some details in the present. We are not seeing the movement that we have been a part of for thousands of years. We are here on this small sliver of space and time to give what we can, and we don't get to see the results of it, but we are showing up here to say we're going to keep doing this thing, right? I could give you statistics. So I will. No, you guys all know the numbers. You've seen the statistics. But the 2023 to 2024 religious landscape study of the Pew Research Center says 62% of U.S. adults identify as Christian. Now, we probably would think it's probably the followers of Jesus are a much smaller percentage of that, right? 62%. But Gallup's long-term trend attendance of churches says church attendance fell from 42% 10 years ago to now 30%. So it's fallen nearly 2 points a year. So if we're at 30 now and we continue to decline at that rate, in 15 years, a brick and mortar church could be obsolete. What are we going to do about it, right? NPR wrote an article called The Great De-Churching, based on a book by Mike Graham and Pastor Jim Davis. And they said 40 million Americans have left churches or other religious institutions in the last 25 years. Now, do we really believe that trend is going to reverse? And if we don't, how is our posture going to be in the world? What are we going to do with our individual and our collective influence? Now, there is good news. Where is it? I don't even know if I have any good news, actually. Oh, yeah, I do. 86% of the people who responded to the Pew Center said they believe people have a soul or spirit in addition to their physical body. 83% believe in God or a universal spirit. 79% believe there is something spiritual beyond the natural world, even if we can't see it. 70% believe in an afterlife. What that means is the people that we're trying to, the world is not dead, that America is not gone, that we are not taken over by this horrible theocratic movement, because there are people all over this nation who are saying there is something more and I just need to find a place to pursue it. And so the Christian left, or progressive Christianity, or liberal Christians, or Jesus Christians, or whatever we want to call ourselves, we have to simply see the felt need in our world, in our nation, and begin responding to it. But these are tough questions, because Will Rogers was once quoted as saying, when the horse is dead, dismount. Now, we all love our faith tradition. We've spent our lives caring for it, seeing beautiful things in it, but is organized Christianity a dead horse? For a second, let's pull away from the national picture or systemic questions and into a much smaller space. Have you ever seen that? It's like a meme. It says, I can't adult today. I mean, it's basically a phrase. Have you ever woken up one day and said, I can't Christian today? I've thought that many days. I can't be tethered to this thing any longer that feels so toxic and damaging. I can't weed through any more bad theology or terrible behavior. I can't sift through all this malice and try to find out what's left worth claiming. And I think you're probably here because you feel that exasperation. This is not just about structures. This is about your life. It's about the relationships. It's about community. These things that we are so in danger of losing. It's a pretty terrifying thing when stuff you always knew, you suddenly say, I'm not sure if I know this anymore. In fact, I have a sneaking suspicion I don't believe this. I was preaching one day years ago, and I said, in the middle of my preaching, I said, you know you don't believe that. But I was up here like this, because this is what I needed to do. And then eventually I realized, no, I need to get up and say, hey, here is the reading from Matthew today. I'm not sure I even agree with this, but let's just talk about it, right? I miss my certainty. I can remember when people would say, are you a Christian? And I'd say, bam, yeah, I am. Look at my shirt. Check out my bumper sticker. I got a Hillsong CD in the car, WWJD bracelet on, and I know the song that's playing in Chick-fil-A without words. It's always Chris Tomlin. It's always Chris Tomlin. But friends, things are different now for me, maybe for you. Now when people ask me if I'm a Christian, there needs to be a conversation, an unpacking. I need to have caveats and conditions. I need to clarify what the word means to me and what it means to them. I need an answer that is less clean and definitive. And I find myself, like you probably, fighting with and for my faith tradition simultaneously. That is such a mind screw, for lack of a better word. I'll never forget, I was on Twitter years ago before it was taken over by some maniacal oligarch. I was talking with a woman who defined herself as an agnostic queer woman of color. And we were talking about evangelicals and Christianity, and I was trying to convince her to stay, to not let those people sour her image of Jesus and her understanding of Christianity. And I basically said, that's not Christianity what that is. And she said, no, actually, John, this is Christianity to me. She said, this is the only experience I've ever had of Christians. This is the rule. You're the exception. You're the outlier. She said, your heresy is why I love you. And I think you understand this. I think you deeply, most of you, have a spiritual yearning to have the world see what you see, and to know what you know, or to feel what you've felt in the best of organized religion, but you're not sure how to do it. I want to stop and just ask you, is there anything that you're thinking about, questions you're asking, something that you want to respond to that I've already said? Yes, and I'll repeat it.
I'm curious about something. We're from Tulsa, Oklahoma.
Tulsa.
There seems to be a growth of churches on every street corner. They're all different. They all are small.
Yep.
It's like they're all, the Christianity is subdivided into so much little things.
Yep.
I mean, there's a church called Blue Flame 47, and people are going, what the heck does that mean? You know?
Yeah, we're getting down to the bottom of the barrel on church names, aren't we? You know, to be announced church. So you're asking why there are so many churches.
Yeah, why is it subdividing?
Okay, well, the reason that exists is because, and we're going to get to this, one of the suggestions I'm going to have for the left in general is to make sure that we avoid a self-cancel culture. Meaning we don't have a purity test for people around us, for communities, and say, we agree on 2,438 things, but this one thing is why we're going to go down the street and do it better. We are marginalizing ourselves, right? And so whether it's, and see, that's the thing, whether it's something that's more conservative or progressive, we all have that territorialism in us, that parochialism. And so we need to give that up if we're ever going to have some sort of collective voice. So yeah, we'll talk about that. Here's another question. This is going to be a really rough one. What can we learn from MAGA Christianity? How has conservative evangelicalism outplanned, outorganized, or outmessaged us? How has the rise of MAGA Christianity crystallized who we want to be and who we do not want to be? So I'm gonna make some suggestions, and then just put your hand up and we're gonna talk. The first thing I think we need to do is we need to give people a sense of community and shared purpose. So 15 years ago, I was at a youth group workshop with Kara Powell. And she said something I've never forgotten. She says, if you want people to feel significant, give them something significant to be a part of. This is true of high school kids in your church, but it's true of every one of us. It's true of our coworkers and our neighbors and our friends. Purpose is persuasive. When we wonder why so many people, particularly young people, have gravitated toward a man and a movement that are predatory toward even them, it's partially because they have been told that they have a place, that they're part of something, that they're seen in a way they have never been seen, that their voices are heard. And so are we thinking as we go through our day in our ministries and our relationships and our work about the felt needs of people, and about creating something that will be an irresistible invitation to community and care? I think we often lead with theology, or we often lead with the culture war battle that we're always faced with. And we forget that people are going through divorces and their kids are struggling with mental health. And we need to be those caregivers first, because Jesus preached, but he also met the physical needs of people. He fed and he embraced people. And I think we have to be in that business. I was doing some consulting with a church. I was for about a year, and they're in Minnesota. And they were talking about, well, what we'd like to do is talk today about the path to church membership. And I asked them to begin thinking about how they can measure connection to human beings beyond their presence in a building for an hour on Sunday. From membership to partnership. Can we create a movement and invite people into it and throw down all of the other structures that we used to respond to and rely on? See, community and significance are organic, they're relational. Second thing is, I think we need a compelling prime motivation. Years ago, I was talking to a Methodist pastor. He oversaw a huge progressive church, but he used to oversee a huge conservative church. And he sat there with me right before service and he said, I miss hell.
There you go. There you go.
He said, hell was helpful. I could leverage sin and hold eternal damnation over people's heads. I could get them to do almost anything, to show up, to volunteer, to give, to proselytize, all these things. And he said when his faith shifted and his community slowly transitioned to a more progressive theology, he lost the ability to energize people through existential threat, but he had nothing else similarly catalytic to inspire his people and to rally them. And I wonder what we as a progressive movement, what is our prime motivation? What is love? Here's the problem. Love don't sell, Sally. No, we were talking about this the other night. Melinda Hale from the New Evangelicals and I were talking, and we said, love it should be the antidote to all that afflicts us. And it is. The problem is our culture does not respond to love in the way it responds to opposition. And that's why we've been in such a difficult spot, because we have been fighting back. We have been in a defensive posture. We have been a reactionary movement. And we need to now be about creating something that says, I know that's horrible, and we'll get to that, but we have something beautiful and life-affirming. And that's going to be difficult, but can we have an alternative to fear and make that attractive? Can we generate urgency and motivate people through a message that focuses on protecting humanity and the planet? Because whether people are religious or not, that's what they care about. Third thing, we need to become better storytellers and story sellers. You know why MAGA is MAGA? Because of MAGA, the word. Whether it's Make America Great Again or America First or culture war rhetoric against BLM or CRT or woke, the right understands that people need a simple, digestible message that sticks. Now, we don't want to eliminate critical thinking, Lord knows. We don't want to oversimplify complex issues, but we can't afford to allow our arrogance or our intellectualism to prevent us from speaking the language of the people we're trying to reach.
Amen. Amen.
See, in a culture that, for better or for worse, is increasingly reluctant to stop in one place for very long or dig tremendously deeply, we're going to have to find ways to meet with people with immediacy and impact. This is a small example, but I found this out consulting for our church. They had online services, right? Like many people do, and they posted them on YouTube. And I said to them, you know what a 23-year-old guy really wants to do? He wants to sit down for an hour and watch badly presented announcements and three choral hymns and a children's parable. I said, maybe edit the message down to 90-second sections and put it all over social media so people know what your voice is, what you care about, what you stand for. And this church I was working with, they had this Pride Sunday, and the pastor stood up and gave a message about the transgender community that was beautiful and brilliant. And then they put it up on social media, on YouTube, the whole service, and it was titled June 11th, 2024 service. I said, that's going to show up in all kinds of YouTube searches. Friends, what I'm saying is we need to tell our story. We have something beautiful to share. And unless we tell people, they're not going to know it. And we've got to find a way to have that. You know, someone came up to me not long ago. She goes, I was so moved by this Facebook post of yours, and I don't know how it showed up on my profile. I said, yeah. Oh, she goes, I don't know how it showed up on my feed. I said, yeah, you do, because I put it there. I said, I wanted you to hear this, so I put it out there. And I think we become worried about that we're selling religion. We're not. We're inviting people into something life-giving and life-affirming and destination-altering and path-changing, and we need to give that to them. So be better storytellers. And as we alluded to, we need to fight our kingdom-building and self-cancel culture. I have a friend who's in his 70s, and he was a lifelong Christian. He was a pastor for 20 years. And he said the other day, progressive Christianity has created an alternate fundamentalism marked by the same territorialism, gatekeeping, kingdom building, glory seeking as the unhealthy systems most of us made our exodus out of. Now, the progressive faith movement, friends, it is a big tent movement, which is admirable. But as a result, we are experts at carving ourselves up and dividing our collective influence and quieting our shared voice. And if cancel culture does exist, in this context, it's a self-inflicted wound. We saw the last election cycle. We have our purity tests and our deal breakers, and we have just as many of them as the right has. We're so quick to say that person's problematic or their past is worrisome, but we don't give people a chance to actually progress in progressive Christianity. You don't believe what you used to believe 5 or 10 or 20 years ago about marriage or immigration or about gender equality, do you? I should hope not. So we need to make sure that we're allowing people to change and be altered by our presence with them and not push them to the periphery. And the fifth thing, and then I want to open up the floor, we need to seek to become partners instead of seeking to become owners. See, with the numbers, friends, with the trends and the changes, liberal Christians are never going to be more than a minority group within a fringe movement. And since we're never going to want or have political power, we need to figure out how to consolidate our efforts with Muslims and atheists and Jews and humanists. We have to form the community of the convinced, those people who say love is the better path, compassion is the thing that's going to save us. So we need to stop worrying about, is Christianity, progressive Christianity, going to be a bigger presence? We don't have to have that. We have to show up in the everyday of our lives, in the small and the close, in the here and now, and do what we can to live the teachings of Jesus as we know them. And we do that in our communities, and then we worry about who gets credit for it. You know, we don't need to stick our names on something, and we don't need to have T-shirts that say, this is who I am. We can simply show up in our lives. So here are the things I was suggesting. Give people a sense of community and shared purpose. Invite them into something. We need a compelling prime motivation, something that is the alternative to the fear that the conservative religious engine runs on. We need to become better storytellers and story sellers. We need to let people know what we have, not because we want to build our programs or our institutions, because we want to help them have a life that's easier and where they're seen. And 4, we need to fight our kingdom building and self-cancel culture. We rejected all those things, so let's not replicate them now. And we need to seek to become partners instead of becoming owners of the beautiful movement that we want to see in the world. What are you thinking about? Questions, thoughts, grievances? Yes.
Okay, so I'm just thinking in my head, so I'm brainstorming. But in terms of what you were talking about, the untapped spirituality that people have.
Yes.
And the disintegration of the brick and mortar church. And one thing that keeps coming back to me is my son's description of FCA, Fellowship of Christian Athletes, which I'm sure there are some good groups out there.
Mm-hmm.
My son is on the spectrum, high functioning, so he's very matter of fact when he describes things.
Okay.
So basically, when some kid is being an asshole at school, he says, oh, you know, typical FCA kid. Right? This is his interpretation. And I know in our community, kind of the teachings that FCA follows. And so I'm like, wouldn't it be great if there was some packaged alternative to FCA? Something cool, something fun, whether it's, you know, true Jesus followers or
Sure.
true Christians, or just something that makes an obvious attempt at an alternative
Right.
that could pull in, because FCA, I mean, they're getting a bunch of kids who probably aren't even going to church.
Great.
They're tapping them.
And I want to slow
They're messing.
I don't want to stop you, but I have to repeat what you say, so I'll make sure people get the gist as they're watching this. So the question is, my child in school that has FCA, and FCA is often not really synonymous with Christ-like behavior for some reason, and that there's people saying, well, that person's a jerk, there's FCA for you. And could there be an alternative entity created to give people an alternative? But of course there is, and that's what we should be doing. But those things, because we lack the infrastructure, we lack the organizational power that the right has, it's a much heavier lift for us. So what I tell people is, people come up to me on these talks, I travel around the country, and they go, what can we do, John? And I say, something. Right? Or sometimes they don't like that answer. And then I go, I don't know. You tell me. I know nothing about your community. I know nothing about the political structure or what the school board is like. But you do. You're on the ground. So what I say to people is, whatever gap you see in this world, you need to create it now, because it's not going to come from the top. We have no top to come down from. Right? We are, by nature, a movement of the street. Jesus has always been about the people on the ground, right? And so that's what we need to do. So if in your school, maybe it's about, your child and some friends saying, we know this need exists. What could we possibly do? What might be a way? And let something be born out of that. And free mom hugs is one of those things where Sarah Cunningham's here. She just said, you know what? I think people need to be embraced. And they started a small group of people embracing LGBTQ people. Now it's a national entity. But it started as the heart prompt of one person. And so that's what I say, yield into your burdens. What keeps you up at night? What boils your blood? What prevents you from resting and say, I want to figure out how to do something? Because you always have two things, friends. You have proximity to pain and agency to alleviate it. And it's not going to happen overnight, but you can do something today. Yes, sir.
What you said has been exceedingly energetic. My question to you is, how do we convert that energy to a intelligent voting public?
Okay, so I've presented something that was what did you say? Energetic. I'm glad. And how do we convert that energy to a public that is uninformed or apathetic? You say? And not voting. Well, the other thing, I think we could use are some national voices to coalesce around to broadcast the message of our movement. Years ago, someone said to me, John, where are the Franklin Grahams on the left? And I fell on my head. I was like, well, here's the biggest reason. We don't want them. Because progressive Christianity it tends to focus on something quieter, something less about power structures or hierarchy. So we reject authoritarianism. So by nature, we're always going to be a little bit skeptical of lifting anyone up to that level. And we do have people like Reverend Barber and Bishop Buddy and James Tallarico, but I think we need to find voices that we can say, this person is not perfect, but I stand with them. And I don't know how we do that, but I think we do need to have a national presence in a way that we never had before. Part of that is being unapologetic about wanting a national presence. There's nothing wrong with wanting people to know that they are loved and created in the image of a God who does not want them to be saved, changed, or renovated, but loves them as they are. Yes, in the back. Family doctor. Good, because I've got this right here. Oh, we'll talk later. So you're saying that's your calling as a physician? Yeah, so a physician, and the calling is to look at the person in front of you and do something to change that person's reality. And that's what drives you. Okay, call them to their higher selves. With joy. Yeah, and that's a great point. Okay, joy is It's not just a defense posture. You know, happiness and feeling lightness and hope is not just about defense. It's actually the greatest offensive weapon that we have, because what you're able to do something, we have a misery movement on the other side. Have you considered that? People who have the president they wanted, they have the Congress they wanted, the Supreme Court they wanted, and they're still miserable. And so what we have to do is say, we can be horrified by what's happening, and we should be. And we can fight injustice with everything we have, and we will. But we cannot lose the essential joy that should come from being someone who says, I'm about loving God, my neighbor, and my enemy. Right? And the least of these. Back in there, way back in the back, young man with the Obama shirt.
Thank you, sir. All of your points have been great.
All my points have been great. Well, good, but let's stop him there.
The most important point, in my opinion, is the community point. And my suggestion to everyone would be, go to
James Clear's website.
and
Search for
why facts don't change our minds.
why facts don't change our minds.
There's 2 paragraphs in that article on his website that are so important that he basically explain the reason why people on the right are not coming over in its community. He basically says people will not change their mind about what they believe if it means losing their community.
Right.
And so, to me, the most important thing is we're not creating the communities that are inviting people in.
I love.
And there's a lot more I can say.
Yeah, Steve, for sure.
I'll just say one more thing.
Sure.
Spiral dynamics,
Spiral dynamics.
transcend and include.
Transcend and include.
And include is the part of that.
And include is the important part. Thank you, Steve. Well, perfect stuff. Because when we look at what happened in the pandemic, we had a culture that was already socially isolated, but then it brought in geographic isolation, and we've never recovered. There are church communities that dissolved, and we have an epidemic of loneliness. And I think so that sense of purpose also comes from the sense of not being, I'll try not to make this too long, but years ago I was in Charlotte at that church, and we had this big massive event for my first day. It was my first time at a real big church. And so I was like the Jeffersons. I was like moving on up, right? And all these students were there, all these parents. We had this tricked out entertainment, thing going on, and then I saw 2 students are on the back of the room, and they had their hands like this, and I said, that's my mission field. And so I went over there, and I was like in youth pastor mode, and I was like, hey, how's it going? We have this great stuff. We got gaming tables, we got a snack bar, we got music. It's going to be great. And they looked at me like they had contempt for me. So I just kept going, I said, we're on mission trips, we're going to do this awesome stuff and concerts and everything. And they said nothing, and I just kind of said, okay, well, I'm really glad that you're here. And I slunk away thinking, flop sweat all over. 2 days later, I got an email from the older of the students, who was the sister. And she said, I don't know if you remember us, but we came to your event, and our parents forced us to go, which is what you want, students under duress. And she said, but we had bad experience with our former church, and we really had no desire to be there. And she said, but you came up and you seemed to actually care. And she said, you made me feel visible, and I rarely feel visible. And that changed everything about the work that I do. I've been given the 5-minute warning, which I despise, so I'm going to ignore it. So I hope you all brought lunch. A couple more. Yes.
The representative from Texas, James Tallarico, is a rising star. That I put
Yep, James Tallarico.
Yeah, and I may have mispronounced that.
No, it's good.
And he's such a star.
Yep.
Number 2, Jesus wasn't much of an organizer, as best I can tell. And even the early Christians, there was a lot of small movements, and there was a lot of passion in those small movements.
Yep.
The organization came when we started drawing lines and boundaries through Augustine and Council of Nicaea and
Yes.
and all that stuff, it seems to me. So maybe we just need to be happy with the passion of Jesus and go with that.
Love that. So the idea is like Jesus was working on a small level. There are no mega churches in the New Testament as far as I know, right? And so because the movement was always small, it was about people you could see. When I was a youth pastor to 15 kids, it was a beautiful thing. But as I ended up becoming a youth pastor to 340, I couldn't have the same relationship, and I needed to structure things differently. So small, maybe we have to be satisfied with small but effective, right? Small but paying attention. Here's the thing, friends. We have so many people with their hands still up. So I'm going to hang out a little bit, but I know I want to respect all of your time and my friend Ken's. Let me close with this, and then we'll hear from Ken. I don't think progressive Christians want progressive Christianity to win. We want the ways of Jesus to win, right? We want compassion and mercy and generosity and decency to win. We want diversity and equity to win, and that is always possible. So answering the question, has the Christian left failed, implies a finality that does not exist. This is not a hard pass fail. Our story is not over. The failure is in giving up. And so we're not going to do that, right? See, we do have a message that's worth fighting for. We're going to need to be more culturally aware, less arrogant in our posture, more strategic in our methods, and most importantly, we're going to need to find a way to see every person on this planet for the once in history, never to be repeated creation that they are, because that is what Jesus did. Friends, thank you so much for being with me today.
Call it table if you dare to. Call it hanging out on the street. Call it fellowship if you care to. Call it music or the beat. Call it sitting down with some people. Call it hanging in the dark, dark night. Call it anything that you want to, but you may not want to call it church. Call it time for telling stories, eating sandwiches, and playing games. Call it time for discovering what's behind everybody's name. Call it climbing up a big tree for the children who gather around. Call it anything that you want to, but you might not want to call it church. Call it thinking, call it striving, call it learning somebody's name. Call it daring to be lovers. Call it marching into the flame. Call it whatever name you can think of that people might understand. Call it simply being together. Call it simply holding hands. Call it anything that you want to. One thing I would plead. Call it anything that you want to. May not want to call it church. Well, I'm tired of calling it church. I am leaving this thing called church. I'm going to table. I'm going to partnership. I'm going to fellowship. I'm going to storytelling. I'm going to hanging out on the city streets.